So no shit, there we were, delivering the live zoanthrope we'd hauled halfway across the galaxy, when instead of thanking us for our hard work and offering to buy us all a beer, the Inquisitor running the facility placed us under arrest. There ain't no fucking justice. We all stood there, paralyzed at the news that our boss, Inquisitor Oak, had been branded a rogue, a traitor to the Inquisition. The mere fact that we were his subordinates damned us in the eyes of the Inquisition, and to make matters even worse, we were apparently on the hook for just about everything we'd done since the start of our mission, as well as a few things that we hadn't. Not that it really mattered what we had or hadn't done, since the motto of the inquisitorial courts is, "A plea of innocence is guilty of wasting our time." It slowly dawned on each of us that unless something amazingly unexpected happened, our future would consist of a quick trial and execution. If we were lucky, that is. If we were unlucky, it'd be a long trial and a longer execution. Perhaps inevitably, Nubby was the first one to come to grips with the situation, and before the Inquisitor had finished telling his 2 Deathwatch Space Marine bodyguards to kill us if we attempted to do anything, the little trooper was volunteering to testify against Oak in exchange for clemency, and also possibly a small cash payment. The Inquisitor responded to this outburst by briefly turning his unnervingly steady gaze to the cretinous little trooper, who suddenly forgot how to speak mid-sellout. After a few vague, ing sounds, Nubby sat down, gripping his head with one hand and making rude gestures at the Inquisitor with the other. The Inquisitor dropped Nubby from his attention and finished the Marine's orders with an apology for the indignity of the assignment and a promise to call an extra team down to properly arrest us when his ship returned in a few hours. Then, almost as an afterthought, he warned them that the little one is a psyker and will need to be put in one of the cells. Both of the Marines turned their bolters to Nubby and began advancing. There was a bit of confusion as Nubby, who was still incapable of speaking, attempted to hide behind the rest of us. Sarge, seeing an opportunity, grabbed the undersized trooper by his collar and proffered him to the advancing Marines, while Amy and Doc moved in front of Fumbles. Unfortunately, this brilliant plan was spoiled by the fact that the Inquisitor wasn't a gullible idiot. When the Marines returned with Nubby suspended by one augmetic leg, the Inquisitor let out a little sigh of annoyance, which was the most emotion we'd seen from him yet, and told the Marines to stop embarrassing themselves and collect the one in the psyker coat. When the Marines returned with Doc, who'd hurriedly put on Fumble's coat, the Inquisitor let out another sigh and made a gesture. There was a little yelp from the back of our group as an invisible force yanked Fumbles into the air and began levitating him across the landing pad. Without another word to us or the Deathwatch Marines, the Inquisitor followed our whimpering psyker into the large elevator where his non-superhuman flunkies were waiting with the Demonthrope. The elevator's doors slid shut behind Fumbles and the Inquisitor with an ominous boom, leaving our landing party alone on the pad with the 2 Deathwatch Marines. After a few seconds of awkward silence, Amy pointed out that the Inquisitor was a colossal asshole. One of the Marines responded with a vaguely agreeable grunt, earning him an angry look from his partner. All looks are angry in power armor. The pissier of the 2 Marines tossed Doc in our general direction, and then both of them trained their weapons on our little group and settled into comfortable guard stances. All around the pad, the AA guns that defended the facility came to life and turned to rest on our shuttle well. We may not have been cuffed, placed in cells, or even properly disarmed yet. But all in all, it was very clear that we wouldn't be going anywhere. Unless someone did something suicidally stupid, that is. Hopefully it wouldn't have to be us. The All-Guardsmen Party and the REDACTED conspiracy. So, to summarize our situation, we were sweating through our fancy but completely unarmored uniforms on a landing pad, while 2 bolter-armed Deathwatch Marines kept us covered and watched our every movement like genetically engineered superhawks. Since Fumbles was off enjoying the hospitality of the creepily monotone Inquisitor, our landing party consisted of all of us guardsmen, the 3 adepts, and a very unhappy Jim. Armament-wise, none of us, except Twitch and Nubby, who had a few party favors crammed into their pockets, were armed with more than our las pistols. We hadn't just left our pulse weapons behind, mind you. We'd just decided to leave them in the shuttle, where their techno-heretical nature wouldn't cause any problems if the Inquisitor running the facility had a rod up his ass. In retrospect, we might have underestimated the size of the hypothetical rod. Our weapon-filled shuttle was parked a dozen meters away from where the Space Marines had corralled us. Aside from our cache of weapons, it was equipped with a multi-laser turret, which only Jim knew how to actually use, enough armor to hold off bolter fire if the Marines made sure to miss the half-assedly patched Bright Lance holes, and maybe enough fuel to get us back into orbit. Oh, and it also had Sergeant Gravis's stasis unit, but we didn't really see that as tactically significant. The facility we were on top of was your standard secret mountain base affair. You know, a landing pad and a bit of rooftop sticking out of a dangerously steep mountainside, with Emperor knows how much stuff hidden underground. Its only real distinguishing features, as far as we were concerned at least, were the local climate, which was blisteringly hot despite the altitude, and the massive ring of anti-air turrets surrounding the landing pad. We weren't quite sure who was controlling said turrets, or what their reaction time was like, but none of us felt like doing any experiments to figure that out. After our feeble plan to hold on to Fumbles had fallen apart and we'd spent a few minutes stewing in our own juices on the landing pad, the true shittiness of the situation finally began to really sink in. Amy started cursing under her breath and steadily increased the volume until she was ranting like a street corner preacher. Nubby propped his oversized coat up as a sunshade. No poles were used. The thing was actually filthy enough to stand up on its own. And that was after it had been washed, and grumpily sat under it, waiting for his voice to return, and egging Amy on as best he could with grunts and gestures. Sarge just stood stock still, muttering darkly to himself and ignoring everyone else, even when Doc tried to ask him for help subduing Twitch, who'd started pacing in circles and ranting about how he'd known it all along and they were all in on it. Really, Tink and Doc were the only ones who took it best. After an initial freakout, the medic took refuge in the familiar, if difficult task of tranking Twitch before he did anything explodey. Tink spent a few minutes smugly pointing out that while we had been arrested by the Inquisition, it hadn't been for tech heresy, and therefore everyone owed him an apology. He eventually realized no one was listening and decided to sit down and play with his drone controller instead. There was a tense moment as he drew the controller from his tack belt, but the Marines eventually accepted Tink's blatant lie about it just being a data slate and didn't shoot him. As for the rest of the party, Jim sank down into a little puddle of misery, chattering to himself in binary and rocking back and forth, and the adepts all gathered into a little huddle. After a few minutes of serious discussion, the old diplomacy adept turned to the rest of us, cleared his throat until we grudgingly paid attention, and asked us whether we thought Oak had actually turned traitor. He seemed surprised by how little we cared. I mean, it's not like we thought the question of whether or not our boss was a heretical mastermind that had been destroying the Inquisition from within wasn't important. We just didn't see how it was relevant to our current situation. Either A, Oak was a heretic, in which case the Inquisition would imprison, torture, and slowly kill us. B, Oak wasn't a heretic, but someone had framed him as one, in which case the Inquisition would probably imprison, torture, and slowly kill us, though they might apologize to Oak about it afterwards if everything was ever sorted out. C, Oak wasn't a heretic, and the monotone Inquisitor was lying about the Inquisition ordering him to arrest us as part of some sort of conspiracy, in which case a bunch of political backstabbers or a shadowy cabal of heretics would imprison, torture, and slowly kill us. I'm sure you see the common theme here. As far as we were concerned, the question of our Inquisitor's moral status was academic, and was therefore something that could be left to the academics, while we focused on more important issues, specifically how we were going to avoid being imprisoned, tortured, and slowly killed. The old diplomat got a little huffy with us and said some very hurtful things about our attention spans and our intellectual capabilities as compared to those of a bunch of drunken orcs. Eventually, though, he calmed down and announced his and the other adepts' certainty that Oak was innocent. Sarge, who was in just about the worst mood any of us had seen him in, responded with bitter sarcasm, which the diplomat returned with interest. The situation had all the makings of a really good argument, and lacking anything better to do, we all gathered round to watch the fireworks. But then, Tink spoiled everything by asking whether we should tell the Inquisitor everything about the zoanthrope before he finished taking it out of the stasis unit. Well, you better believe that caught everyone's attention, including the two Deathwatch Marines, who could apparently hear everything we were saying. The less pissy of the two Marines, whose only distinguishing feature was a yellow-edged pauldron with a cartoon heart on it, took a few steps towards us. This paused when he realized his companion wasn't moving. The other Space Marine, who sported a sort of pointy black cross on a white background, just shook his head, and Heart Marine sheepishly shuffled back to his guard position as we all huddled around Tink's drone controller. Spot the Wonder Drone had been incorporated into the Demonthrope's containment unit when we'd made the thing mobile, partially because the drone was as good a central controller for the various systems as anything else we had on hand, but mostly because Theo had really wanted to keep the hunk of Wraithbone, which suppressed the lion's share of the Demonthrope's power. The Wraithbone suppressor had been positioned on top of the Demonthrope's pallet, with all its cables and stuff hanging down over the outside of the stasis unit, where they conveniently hid the Demonthrope's smoky wings from anyone who didn't know to look for them. Spot had been encased in its oversized servo-skull disguise and placed on top of the suppressor, where the drone could easily lift the whole thing off and bring it back with us after the Inquisition had set up whatever they used to contain uppity demon hosts. Anyway, thanks to all this, we had a clear readout telling us that the Demonthrope's pallet was about 100 meters below us, and its containment measures were being deactivated by someone who probably didn't know that it held something just a little bit nastier than your average zoanthrope. The question was whether we should try to warn them, let them figure things out for themselves, or maybe help things along a little by pushing the big red button on Tink's drone controller.